Welcome to Mental Health and Faith, a Closer Look. I am Carolyn Cooper. This podcast and YouTube show addresses issues related to mental health and wellness, recovery, our spiritual journey, and what the Bible teaches about living in this complicated world. I also welcome pastors, writers, mental health professionals, and others to come on my show to share how God has navigated them through some challenges in life and how He has given them the power to overcome. Thank you for being here today. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Carolyn, and once again, I am here with Linda McDougal, and she is an amazing therapist who works with children and teens. I hope that you've listened to the first episode we did, which focused on mental health for children, and today she's going to talk about mental health for children 8 and over. So, Linda, why don't you start with a quick introduction again for those who may not have heard the first episode? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you for that introduction, Carolyn. My name is Linda McDougal. God called me into therapy about 20 years ago to be a therapist. I really felt strongly called. And since then, I've walked through some difficult things, and I think it makes me a better therapist because I have some compassion. In Pennsylvania, I used to work with children, again, like 3 until 18, and a most popular diagnosis was autism. The last 10 years, I've been remarried. I'm in Maryland. I'm an in-school therapist, or I was a in-person therapist to see children early childhood as young as 3, child-directed play therapy. But for the last 2 years, I've been on the road and traveling, and I'm doing the Zoom sessions. But I still have about 33 kids I see on my caseload, working a couple days a week, and their ages 3 to 19. But today we're going to focus on my older kids, like elementary school, like 4th, 5th grade, all the way up to high school, and even include their families.
Okay, so you said include your family. So does that mean that you have individual sessions with the kids and then you would have a group session with the entire family, like just the parents or parents and siblings, or how does
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, well, of course, you have to have all the right releases and what have you. If mom comes through intake and she releases maybe their divorce, dad, they share custody, so they could be in a joint session. I may desire to do them separately. But yet, children and their siblings, as long as there's a release, we can certainly have anyone join it. Just what the need is, I guess, where there's a need.
Meeting their needs. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned intake. I know that's something that you wanted to talk about. What does it
Yeah.
mean to do an intake on an individual?
Right. Well, with my company, there's one person, 2 or 3 people that do the intakes, but I have done them before. An intake just means you call a mental health agency and they bring you in to sign your kiddo up for therapy, and they do several releases of information, and you come out with a diagnosis, or at least 1 or 2, so that insurance can be billed. And I would say most of my kiddos come in with an adjustment disorder if they're young, like 8 and 9, or even younger. And that just means they're having trouble adjusting to life somehow. There could be grief. Parent could be in prison. But as we get into the older kiddos, I'm starting to see things. I always say the older the child, the bigger their problems. So when I'm getting into middle school and high school, I'm seeing girls, mostly girls, with disordered eating. I'm seeing boys and girls struggling with suicidal ideation, thoughts of wanting to not live. Yeah. I'm seeing depression. So I quite often will do a depression index, PHQ-9, once a month or so, especially for kids that are already taking antidepressants. At my agency, they have prescribers too. So we've got kids, again, with the autism that are on mood stabilizers because their anger is so extreme. But anyway, as you come through intake, they give you the whole history to the person, and it's just part of the intake. And by the end of it, it can be an hour and a half, 2 hours for an intake. You should have a diagnosis, and then you'll be placed with a therapist like me.
And that sounds like a really essential step because you don't know how to treat someone unless you know what's going on. and what the
Exactly.
diagnosis is. So when they come in and they've had their intake and they've come in with this diagnosis, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, like I said, when I was in the schools, I would pull kids out and have lunch with them, and we'd develop a treatment plan with the parents. So, for instance, let's say somebody's grandfather just passed away, and so we'd come up with a treatment plan to talk about the grief, to process the grief. And maybe I meet with them weekly. Maybe it was twice a week. Of course, now it's on Zoom. I meet with most of my kids every other week because I've had them for a few years and they're in a good place of stability, but they still need to check in. So if I had a kiddo with, really dealing with the loss of a parent or a grandparent, I mean, loss shows up in many different ways. I would use an intervention called cognitive behavior therapy specific for trauma. So it's TFCBT. I
Oh,
don't I don't know if you want to have me talk about that a little bit.
yes, because I'm trauma is I'm pretty experienced with trauma from having trauma, but also as a peer specialist, I did a lot of trauma training, and I'm not sure that I've heard the combination of CBT specifically focused for
For
trauma.
trauma.
Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that and maybe an example of how you've worked with a child?
Yes.
That
So I got trained online for this. You can get trained as a specialty. I'm not certified, so to speak, but I certainly do it. And so they have a checklist you go down. It's a certain format. It can be done in 12 weeks. You go through like the coping skills. How would you cope? Like, let's say they're at Walmart and someone looks just like grandfather and he has the same cologne on and the child is re-triggered again. And with trauma, your body doesn't know that it's not happening again. It thinks it's still in that moment. So just teaching them cognitively, I'm safe, grandfather's safe, he's in heaven with Jesus, it's okay. It wasn't my fault that I didn't help him when he fell, whatever. When you go through trauma, your belief system gets askew, it gets messed up. So, for instance, in that example, let's say the little boy was home with grandpa and grandma had to run down the street and he fell and he had a stroke, a heart attack, and he died. Well, that little guy, let's say he's 8, would feel responsible. Oh, I didn't get it quick enough. I didn't call 911 quick enough. And so they develop a belief system that's not helpful that says, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And most of our belief system is 85% it's unconscious. Like we don't even know what it is we believe. We have, automatic thoughts and what have you that come out of that place. But as we work through that trauma focused CBT, they would write their trauma narrative with using, I'll call it godly beliefs. Maybe I didn't call 911 quick enough, but God is stronger. He knew it was his time to take grandfather home. He was 91 after all. So you go through the narrative, you replace the ungodly, the unhelpful beliefs with helpful beliefs. And then at the end, if the person is open to reading their trauma, they can read it to the family. Now, I've done this with sexual abuse advisor, people that have come through that. And it's really quite powerful because what we think affects what we believe. And if we can change our thoughts, we change our beliefs, which of course changes our behaviors. And God's all about renewing our mind, right? And having the mind of Christ Jesus. So I can't necessarily share my faith with a family in a public school system, but if they're Christians and they opt for using their faith principles as part of the treatment plan, then I can surely do it.
that's wonderful. Wow, that is such excellent information, Linda. Um, thank you so much for sharing that. It's comforting to hear that there
Mhm.
are therapies and interventions, as you called them, out there. Are there other intervention? And can you actually, I think everybody probably realizes when you're saying intervention, you're talking about a specific modality or a
Yes.
therapy, but can you kind of define intervention? Why is
Yeah.
that word used?
Yes, thank you for catching me on that. And that is definitely therapeutic jargon. So when we have a problem, like if the house is on fire, the fireman comes out and puts water on the fire. So a therapist, if you get a client that's had some molestation or some kind of trauma, you have to have something to put that fire out. So that's what we call the interventions. And
Mm-hmm.
I find cognitive behavior therapy is helpful. Dialectical behavior therapy is helpful. There's different interventions, and you get trained as a therapist. And some people are trained with EMDR, which is helping to reform the thoughts with watching the ball go back and forth. I don't believe it's hypnosis, but it actually scrambles the beliefs. So I'm not trained in that one, but I am trained in just talk therapy, mindfulness, and I have my favorite, but I'll say that for the end.
Okay. Well, I've done all of those in my own
Yeah.
life.
Wow.
And why don't you, when I went through my trauma healing and therapy experience, and so I've used all of those and they are very beneficial. Now, some people out there might be caught with the term dialectical behavioral
Mm-hmm.
therapy, and I know what that is because I've used it. But for people that have never heard that term before, what is dialectical behavioral therapy?
Wow. And again, this is one that I don't use often, so I'm not as skilled on it as the most. But for instance, interestingly enough, two things can be true at the same time.
Mm.
So you can, I'm thinking of an intervention that I might use with children that struggle with self-hatred and self-rejection. Um, they can hate that part of themselves that maybe is binging and purging, or cutting, doing self-destructive behavior. At the same time, they can learn to give that part a hug. So you do the opposite. You do the opposite. You love that part. So it's not like you are angry at that part. This part is doing its job the best it can to help take the spotlight off, all the pain. So I don't know. What was your experience with DBT?
My experience was a lot of emotional regulation exercises and things like that, which sounds like it matches kind of what you were saying, like to
Yeah,
correct or to really understand what your emotion is and be able
right.
to regulate it in a way that results in healthy behavior versus non-healthy behavior.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
yeah, which sounds like
Big
kind of what you're saying, if
emotions.
they have this hate, but they can still
Hmm.
love, I mean, it's working with their
Yes.
emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Those big emotions, big, big, big emotions.
Mhm.
And, I think another example is hold an ice cube in your hand till it melts.
Oh,
Learning to wake up the vagus nerve. I think this is a different kind of therapy, but the vagus nerve is what modulates it. It's what puts that the parasympathetic nervous system back online,
ah,
which is the calm, the rest, digest. And when we're out of our window of tolerance and we're freaking out with big emotions, or we've imploded and we're like detached, we need to get ourselves back where we need to be. So you learn all these tricks of the trade, I guess.
well, let me ask you a question. Um, if I'm a parent of a child
Mm-hmm.
in this middle school to high school range, what kind of signs should I watch for to help me as a parent discover that my child might be struggling with a mental health issue?
That's so hard because kids are good at hiding stuff. But,
Mhm.
hopefully, prayerfully, your parents have a good relationship with their kiddos. They're checking their phone, they're checking their socials. But I mean, I have parents that are even doing testing because, if the kid's missing school or they're not eating correctly, they're not getting enough calories. Really, and there's so much addiction that happens in middle school, and when we see the depression rates really increasing. So I guess the best answer is to have a really open relationship with your child, and that's not so easy. um, I was looking here at my rating scale for family stress checklist.
Mm.
So if a parent came in and they were worried, the practitioner, the therapist should have something to go by. So, for instance, if a child has a parent with a criminal mental illness or substance abuse, that's troubling for the child. So it depends too where the parent is and are they able to be forthright. And also we see family histories come through. Was the parent beaten or deprived as a child?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to see the family dysfunction, low self-esteem, depression. Yes, there can be multiple crises, but I would say the best you can get to a good therapist. Start with your pastor. Start with youth. Yeah, someone that's seeing the children.
Oh, no, that's an excellent idea. Talk to other people who are around your children just to check in and see how they are when they're
Right.
not at home.
School
Oh,
counselor.
yeah,
Yeah.
great idea.
I was going to say to tie the first interview and the second interview, what I see in common from 3-year-olds to 18 is we all can have a spirit of shame on us.
Mm,
And I'll just quickly say, if you have a hard time asking for help, if you don't like being dependent on others, if you feel uncomfortable if someone compliments you, if you feel guilty saying no. Again, this is a shame questionnaire. Again, you can probably just Google that. Children, have this from early childhood. I had it because you think there's something wrong with you when in fact it's the parent that was struggling.
So we've talked about intake and different interventions and just kind of all kinds of tips for parents. Oh, it's been wonderful. But I know you mentioned to me that you actually have a favorite intervention that you like to use and that it actually can be tied to or connected with our life as a Christian
Yeah,
using
absolutely.
using that. So can you tell us a little about that?
Thank you. Yes, and I have my book ready. So it's called Internal Family Systems. Again, I'm not certified, but I've had enough training in it that I know the skills. And this is by Dick Schwartz, and I don't know when he started. I think it's probably 30 years old. The idea is that within ourselves, we have this internal system that carries different parts that need healing. He calls them the exiles. So, for instance, you may have a little guy that feels he's got the world on his shoulders, and he's such a perfectionist and he's anxious. And then you might have the kid that's, the world has just been traumatic and they're self destructing. And these parts have such big emotions and they're calling for attention. Here we have the angry part, right? He just wants to burn the world down. And this kiddo was, of course, on that rabbit. He's like he's like a rabbit on the wheel. We have children that have been ostracized, and what happens is that big emotion. Perhaps it happened when they were 2 years old, and mom and dad going through a divorce, and they thought it was their fault, and he was a victim of other people's anger, and so that part continually gets triggered. He's now in 7th, 8th grade, and the lunchroom is a scary place. So the idea is to go in and to get to that part that's usually unconscious and release it of its heavy burden. We have other parts that get in the way, and this is the manager saying, no, you're not going to talk to that part because we're going to make sure we run, the 4K, or we're going to make sure we go lift up, 200 pounds of weights at the gym. We're over here. So anything to distract, you have different parts of your personality that just kind of come forward. And then the really scary parts, are carrying such grief. They may need to, they may be doing the self-destructive stuff, and you may need to hospitalize kids like that. But the idea in this theory is that there's a strong self that can provide healing and nourishment and love to these other parts. And the reason I like this is because I believe in our spirit man, that's where Holy Spirit resides, and that's the presence of God that is in us, as Christians, and we can begin to bring that healing to these parts, which ties right into what I do with my church, usually as a small group, restoring the foundations. This is a Christian, Christ-based inner healing and deliverance ministry that's very similar, that brings Christ into these hurting parts. And I've done this for 20 years. It's probably the sole reason I'm so healed is because of the Lord just keeps peeling back onion layers and rescues that part of me that feels lonely and rejected. And so that in a nutshell is probably my favorite things.
Wow. It sounds like really God is using you in the secular world as
Mm.
well as in the body of Christ. Um, I just want to, what would you say? Let me ask this way. What would you say to parents out there who are searching for help, whose children have those big emotions that you mentioned that are impacting their life, their daily life? What would you say to them
Mm.
that they need to do?
Yeah, well, most states have insurance. So if you can't afford a therapist, you don't have a like Blue Cross or Blue Shield, go get your kids on state insurance. Most therapists will take that. And I think that would be my first. If it's a secular, situation like school and what have you. Otherwise, most pastors and youth pastors should be trained in some of this. There should be someone that can counsel and pray with you. But yeah, I would definitely say look for professional help.
That's great. Okay. Do you
Yeah.
you mentioned a checklist? I'm wondering if it would be possible to provide to the people listening to this program to provide them with a checklist, or can you direct them to some
Yeah.
free resources online that they could check?
I'm pretty
To
sure
help.
I can. I've been at this so long, I'm not sure these websites are still available. But at the point I downloaded these, they were. I'm just looking here at uh, schema therapy. I'll have to make sure it says permission is granted for readers to use this item in clinical practice.
Oh,
But you
okay.
can you can go online and Google schema therapy. Schema is just a belief system. For instance, um, um, you might have the your child might have this unconscious dysfunctional schema. I must be perfect to be accepted. I'm
Mm, mhm,
stupid.
mhm.
If I make one mistake, I'll lose everything. I'm unattractive. You must be in control always. Never show your emotions. Those are unhelpful schemas.
Wow.
So you probably can Google unhelpful schemas. You can probably
Okay.
Google automatic thoughts. I should be doing better in life. That's what we call a shouldn't and ought. That's not helpful because it keeps you at a standard. I've let them down. I keep messing things up. I can't handle this.
Well, that sounds like a lot of teenagers.
Yeah,
I
sadly.
mean, really, it does.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think sometimes it's hard for parents or guardians, whoever is with these kids. I think sometimes it's hard to think, is this a normal teenage kind of behavior,
right.
normal preteen teen behavior, or is there something else going on here?
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. That is a difficult call. I think when you see like the depression or the anger or the big emotions, if they're so big that they're interfering with the child's everyday life, then
Mm,
it's probably a diagnosis. Yeah. Some people just go through peaks and valleys and can move through stuff. But when I see kids wanting to harm themselves, and can't get to school, can't get up, they're not eating, clearly they need someone to help them go into their belief system and change it for the better, which can
okay.
be done. This can be done. Yes.
I'm writing notes.
Oh, very
And
good.
and I will have my notes and links and all kinds of resources in the show notes because it is our children and teens are struggling
Yeah.
in this world, as you've heard Linda say. So I want to make sure that I have a lot of information there, and I'd love to have Linda come back.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Linda, this has been a wonderful episode again. You're so
Thank you.
wise, and I thank you so much for sharing. Please, again, look at the show notes. If you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt
Mhm.
or uncle or a neighbor or someone who has children in your life and you witness that things don't seem to be quite right,
Yes. Mhm.
especially emotionally, um, check out these resources that we're going to post and listen to this episode again, share this episode with others. Linda has given us some amazing tips and really a lot of encouragement today that especially through Christ, we can overcome all things.
Absolutely.
So thank you for being here today, Linda, and we're definitely going to maybe have you come back on another time because I enjoy our conversations.
Yes, Carolyn, it's been wonderful. Thank you for the privilege for being here.
You're welcome. See you next
Okay.
time.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please subscribe and leave your comments, questions, and even suggestions. I would love to hear from you. Join the conversation on mental health and faith. Have a blessed day.